everybody, welcome back to Crafting on a Budget. Today we're going to be looking at homemade textured paste, and this is a tried and tested paste I've been using for a good number of years now, and we're going to try it out in the low cost journal or no cost journal that we made the other day. And we're also going to be looking at colouring texture paste and also using it for some rather surprising purposes. So watch along and see what we're doing today with our low-cost homemade texture paste. So for those of you who watched my last video where we were creating homemade gesso and trying it out in a no-cost journal, you'll be pleased to know that texture paste, you can use exactly the same ingredients. Now, I did a comparison in the last video between a gesso that I'd bought and a gesso that I'd made, or two different types of gesso that I made. I can't do that today because I have to be really honest and say I have never bought texture paste. I found a recipe quite early on in my crafting journey, and to be honest, I've just always made it because it works. And you know, there's that old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So today I'm going to be giving you a quick demonstration how to make texture paste. I'll give you the recipe in the description box below as well, and we're going to be trying it out. So I make it in a jam jar, nothing fancy, and you can see this one's been used before. When I make it and keep texture paste in a jam jar like this, I find it keeps between 3 and 4 months. Now that may vary depending on the climate that you're living in, but that's what I find here. I'm in sort of a, we're almost subtropical here in the central North Island of New Zealand, and we have some really hot summers, but some sort of warm, wet winters. So that's the climate I'm in. It will vary depending where you live, but keep your jam jar nice and tightly sealed and it should last a while for you to use. All right, so let's get going without further ado. Now I'm using the same talcum powder that I had last time in the gesso to make the gesso, and this is just a cheapie from the dollar store talcum powder. You can use something like this, or you can use whatever you've got. And hey, look, if it's fragranced, well, so much the better. Your texture paste will smell nice. So I am measuring a 1/4 cup. Oh, doesn't want to come out now. There we go. So a 1/4 cup of the powder, the talcum powder. Pop that into my jam jar. Pop the lid on just so we don't have any mishaps. And then I'm back to my measuring spoons. And I'm going to do a tablespoon of PVA glue. It's a generous tablespoon, but that's okay. And then I'm going to add, I'm just going to grab the lid of my jam jar here. I'm going to add a tablespoon of white acrylic paint. And you'll notice both of these things I buy in quite large quantities because it's more cost effective and because I use quite a lot of them for making gesso and texture paste. Right, so we're going to pop those in our jam jar. Just going to use a brush to get rid of the last of that. And those things need to go into soak quite quickly so that they don't get all gungy. All right, I picked up a pack of these plastic, what do you call them, artist spatulas. I'm not a massive fan of plastic, I have to say, but these are quite durable. And again, they were in my local dollar store. There was a pack of 4 or 5 different shaped ones for a couple of dollars. I think that was another one. Gosh, I can't find the others at the moment. Oh, there's another one. Maybe it was those 3. So you can see that I've used these two quite a lot. In fact, this shape is probably better. So if you're crafting on a budget, these are great. They do the job. And given that they They are quite durable. I feel that that sort of outweighs the plastic consumption. Right, so all I'm going to do is give it a mix, and you'll see that being in the jam jar is much easier to mix than the little pots I had in the last video where I was making gesso. Right, now can you see that is a stiff paste? That's not even falling off my spatula. All right, and that's the consistency that I prefer for texture paste. I found it works well, it dries well, it doesn't seem to crack too much, and it takes paint or other colour pigments over the top. All right, now again, the massive advantage of making your own supplies like texture paste and gesso is that you can add water, or you can add a little bit more paint or PVA glue to thin these down if you want a different consistency. With the texture paste, I would suggest adding a little more of the acrylic paint if you want it a little bit thinner. But as I say, I've always found this recipe suits what I do and works well. So again, don't change it if it's not, if it's not broken, don't fix it. All right, so let's see how this works. And I do tend to leave it just to sit for maybe 5 minutes before I use it, just to make sure everything's absorbed, and then give it a stir. So this is a low-cost journal that we made from a calendar earlier on in this series, and I gessoed all the pages with the homemade gesso that we made, and the front page was the bought gesso so that we could compare. Now you'll see this is the gesso that I made with the plaster of Paris, and I've painted over one page here so that you'll be able to see what I'm doing today. And I'm just going to bring my bit of plastic back in and protect the rest of my journal there. So this is just acrylic paint, nothing fancy, say student quality. In fact, I think it came from Kmart, and I know Kmart are available in Australia and New Zealand. Their range of paints are fine. They're not top quality, but for mixed media work and often on the gel plate, they're absolutely fine. So I've painted acrylic paint on. I've got a stencil. In fact, this is an old cake decorating stencil, and I picked this up. I would have picked this up in a charity shop. You can see that I've used it a lot. It's one of my favourites. It gives a really cool kind of mandala effect. So I'm going to put that on there. I'm going to give my texture paste another stir. And that's it. A little tip is always give your texture paste a stir before you use it, particularly if it's been sitting for a little while. And this is where I'm going to swap over. I personally find this shape, called offset, better when I'm doing something like this. So I'm going to pop the texture paste on and just push it through the stencil. Now the lovely thing about these cake decorating stencils is that you'll often find they're made of slightly thicker plastic than some of the art stencils. And I find when you're doing texture paste like this, that slightly deeper thickness enables you to get a really good good dimension, I think is the word I'm looking for, with your texture paste. Now I'm being a little bit careful because I don't really want to go over the edge too much. I can rectify that in a minute, and I'll show you how. Now, if you're doing a project or you know that over the next couple of weeks you're going to be using lots of texture paste, you can mix up bigger quantities, of course, just double the recipe or even triple it if you're going to be using lots. But I tend to just make up a small amount at a time. You saw it was quick and easy to do, and as I say, I haven't tested it beyond about 3 or 4 months life expectancy, purely because I tend to use it within that time. But given that there's no sort of form of preservative or anything in it, I would be a little bit hesitant about keeping things too long. So just make up the quantity that you think you're going to use. This is quite a big stencil, and as I say, it's a cake decorating one, so I'm getting some really good depth with this texture paste here. So it's taking more than perhaps an art stencil might. I love doing this. It reminds me of plastering walls. My uncle taught me to plaster a wall when I was about 12 years old, and I never thought it would come in useful. But I've actually renovated a good number of houses over the years, and it's a skill I've used. Alright, so there we go. I just scraped that off like that. And we'll just lift this off carefully. And there you can see we've got some lovely lovely depth and texture. Now I'll deal with these little bits in a minute, but what you can also do to make the most of the texture paste left on your stencil, this is a piece of rice paper, but you can just as easily use plain gift wrap tissue. Turn that stencil over and just gently press it down onto your paper. Transfer as much of the residue as you can, and you will find, even if you don't get a perfect print or a perfect imprint, this can be the start of a really interesting collage piece. So this is something you can tear up and use. You can colour, and it just has a little bit of texture to start using for collage pieces. Alright, so again, this needs to go into soak in some water quite quickly. Let's pop that to dry out the way. I'm just going to give my hands a wipe. Okay, now if you get little bits like this where you don't want them, that's okay, don't panic. You can of course incorporate them into your design, or whilst the texture paste is still wet, you can just scrape them off. But you know, the beauty with mixed media art is that it doesn't have to be perfect. But if you've got bits that you really don't want, you can just take them off. There we go. So I'll lift you up and show. Can you see? You can see the depth there of that texture paste. Alright, I'm going to do another one. I'm going to choose another stencil and try and do it on this side, which has just got the gesso. And then once they're dry, we'll come back and we'll have a look and compare the two. Look at this stencil. This is more of an art stencil, just a plastic one, and I'm going to use this one to put some texture on this page ready for a mixed media background. I just want to find another There we go. If you missed my last video, these little bits of plastic come from, I sometimes buy frozen pastry sheets, which I assume are available in most places. And these plastic sheets are used to separate the sheets of frozen pastry. So I don't throw them away, I keep them because they're awesome. Just the right size for things like this. Okay, so this one I'm going to use to create more of a background. So I'm going to be moving it around and pushing the texture paste through. And you can just see already that I'm using a lot less texture paste. This stencil's a lot thinner than the cake decorating stencil. So you'll still get a nice textured effect on your page, but it won't be quite so prominent, won't be quite so raised up as the cake decorating stencil, which is thicker. So because I'm going to use this as a background, I'm just going to do some random areas on my page. And then when I turn this into a mixed media page, it's going to, the texture in the background is just going to add some interest and some dimension. Might just put a little bit there. There we go. And I'll try and lift that up so that you can see the difference in the depth. So can you see that's the cake decorating one? It's got quite a lot of depth. And the thinner art stencil is just literally giving you a little bit of texture on the background. So there we go, folks. I'm going to leave those to dry. My personal preference is to leave texture paste to dry naturally rather than using a heat source. I have used a heat source in the past, but as I say, I just prefer the effect I get with this recipe of leaving it to dry naturally. And I've heard other crafters say the same thing about texture paste that they've using. So we're going to have a little bit of patience, but we're going to leave that to dry. When it's dry and we'll come back, I'm going to show you how to colour your texture paste if you want to use it coloured to start with. Alright, as you can see, I've taken a little bit of the texture paste and I've put it in a pot. And this, again, it's just a student grade acrylic paint. It's in a teal blue. And I'm just going to mix a little bit of that blue in with the texture paste. And you can see it comes out a little bit lighter than the original, obviously because you're mixing it with the white of the texture paste. Should just bear that in mind when you're picking colours. And then we're going to use it in exactly the same way. I've just got a piece of coloured paper here so that you can see it better. And I'm just going to push that textured paste through my stencil. Now you can do this over a ready painted background to add immediate colour and texture, or you can do things like this and create backgrounds which you then use, or you might want to use pieces like this in other collage work. However you want to use your textured paste, by mixing the colour in, there you go, you immediately get that effect. We can come over and probably we'll get another one on this side. And look at that, doesn't that make a superb background to use? Or as I say, it could be collage fodder, anything you like. You've got texture, you've got colour, and you know, really it's like a lot of things. You are limited only by your imagination. Now, there are lots of textured pastes out there that you can buy, and there's lots of fancy things. There's ones with gels in, there's ones with sand in. I've got to be honest, I've not tried them. As I say, I have always found this homemade texture paste is absolutely enough for what I want to use. But you can experiment, add different things to your texture paste, and let's face it, if you're making it yourself, you're not wasting a lot of ingredients if it doesn't work. There we go. Let's lift that up. Wow, look at that. Beautiful, bright, vibrant colours with just a little bit of paint and texture paste. All right, I'm going to put that to dry. I'm going to Okay, the last thing I want to show you today with the texture paste is something I'm really excited about. Now, I'm going to be really honest and go, I've not tried this out yet. So, but I saw a video a couple of weeks ago by Eddie from Eddie Makes Art, and I'll link that video below. And I think this idea is just amazing. Now, Eddie was doing this on chipboard. I don't have any chipboard, but I do have this. It's really solid card, and these were this is packaging. It was dividers in a gift box, so they were sort of in a box like this, and you know, keeping all the little bits in the box separate. And of course I kept them. Now, again, a little tip from Eddie, use a bit of masking tape on the back to make a handle. And what we're going to be doing with these is to make some plates, some kind of printing plates to use on the gel plate or with acrylic paints. I can't explain it any better than that right now, but you'll see what I mean when we have a go. So again, you grab a stencil and you grab your chipboard or thick piece of cardboard, pop your stencil on, grab your texture paste and do exactly what we were doing earlier on the journal pages. Now, what you want with this, according to Eddie, is a nice, smooth, even texture with your texture paste. So you want it to be about the same height all the way over. Because when this dries, you're going to use it to pick up paint from your gel plate or from a palette to put onto a page. So these are going to work a little bit like, the nearest thing I could think of to describe them is foam stamps. So I'm just going to make that nice and smooth, or as smooth as I can. And then we're going to very carefully lift that up. There we go. Oh, wind's just got up and I've got the door open. Right, we're going to carefully put that to dry. This is where that little tab on the back comes in handy. And you can see you can just tidy up the edges. There we go. Now we're going to pop that to dry, and once that's dry, as I say, we can use it in exactly the same way you would use a foam stamp. So let's put that. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing with another one. This stencil, I don't know whether you can see on camera, but this has some little crosses cut into it. You'll see when we take this off in a minute. There we are. And there is our textured stamp ready to go. Now, another cool thing that Eddie was showing on the same video, I showed you earlier how to turn your stencil over onto a piece of gift wrap tissue or rice paper to start making a textured background. But one of the things that Eddie did was to take his paper and his stencil that he'd used and place it same side up, and it works particularly well with a stencil like this that's got quite a big surface area where you haven't pushed the textured paste through, because you've got all this textured paste left on the surface. And what he did was then just scraped this and pushed the leftover paste through the stencil onto the tissue or the rice paper, whatever you happen to be using. And look at that, we've used all that paste that was just on that stencil. You just scrape and push it through. You can scrape any final bits off or push them through the next bit of your stencil. Might even get all those rows done. There we go. We have the start of a lovely background piece for mixed media work, and we've really not used any more supplies other than a sheet of, as I say, gift wrap tissue or rice paper, whatever you have. Right, let's put something on that so that it doesn't blow away. We're going to do one more of these. Again, I've got my little tab on the back. This time I'm going to use another cake decorating stencil just to see the difference, because again this is a little bit thicker. I had pulled this one out which is an art stencil. This one's just a little bit thicker, so I'm going to try this one and see the difference in terms of the depth of texture paste that we get. Now, I have to position this one quite carefully. I have got a bigger piece here, so it's not quite big enough for that word, so I just want the hearts. And I think if I go that way, maybe that would look good. Let's try that. Now I'm going to avoid this bit. So what I'm actually going to do, because I don't want the texture paste to come through there, I'm just going to tape off that bit of the stencil. So that I'm not getting texture paste through that bit. All right. I'm just working that paste through, trying to get as much depth with a nice smooth surface. There we go. There we go. Now you can already see that's got much more depth because this is a cake decorating stencil and is thicker plastic. So later on in this series we'll try them both out and we'll see which gives the better results. All right, we'll pop that up to dry. Excuse my arm. I'm going to grab our same piece of rice paper. I'm trying to fit this on without touching the other bits that are still wet. And I'm just going to push that leftover textured paste through, just so that we're not wasting stuff that we've made time creating. So big thumbs up to Eddie for these ideas. As I say, it was a couple of weeks ago that I saw his video just as I was planning this series, and I was just so taken with the idea of making these texture plates. That I thought I would include them. So there we go, we've scraped virtually everything off that stencil and we've got a nice bit of a background to start working with for our mixed media projects. All right, let's pop all this up to dry and we'll come back and we'll take a quick look at what we've done. Right folks, this has dried up, so let's have a quick look at what we've achieved today with our texture paste. So we started off by making texture paste, which was 1/4 cup of baby powder, or you could use any talcum powder, a tablespoon of PVA glue and a tablespoon of white acrylic paint. And we've tried that in 2 different ways. We've used a cake stencil, which is quite thick, and as you can see from here we've got quite a depth of texture. And then we've used an art stencil, which was a bit thinner, and we've got some lovely texture for a background there for a multimedia page, or a mixed media page, sorry. And we also looked at how to colour the texture paste before we use it, and we made some textured plates to use in mixed media work, particularly on gel plates. So there's a couple, and here's another one I made off camera, and there's the swirly one. And as a byproduct of those things, we also used up the textured paste that we had on some rice paper, with some random patterns through stencils, and these are going to make some lovely backgrounds for mixed media work. So there we go, folks. As I say, I've never bought texture paste because I've always found that this works. I'd love to know what you think. If you usually buy a texture paste, perhaps try this one out, give it a go and compare. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But for now, I'm going to ask if you've enjoyed this video. If you found it's valuable, please do like and share. That way other people get to see as well. But for now, thank you for watching. Ka kite anō.